This episode will be slightly different than some of the others that we've recorded. It won't be different because it doesn't deal with a mountain mover, because it truly does. Although you'll hear through this podcast that he doesn't want any credit for the story that we're about to share with you. It's different because this mountain mover moves mountains outside of his profession. We've talked with, and we will continue to talk with, people who are mountain movers within their industry, and they do extraordinary things. And although he's very good at what he does, this podcast has nothing to do with his profession. So this episode, we'll talk with a guy who has been moving mountains for people for a long time. John Heilman, who is a guy who lives about an hour north of Philly. Through his story, you will hear about his special and unique connection and relationships with children and adults in Uganda. This organization that John will talk about states on their website that it exists to care for Africa's most vulnerable children, who in return will become productive citizens and will rebuild the foundations of their societies that have been destroyed. John could share many, many heartbreaking stories about children who have been rescued out of some very terrible situations. I hope that you can stop for a few minutes and listen to this amazing story about how love changes people's stories. Well, John, thanks for joining us today. This is our fourth Mountain Movers podcast, and I know we know each other. We've known each other for quite a few years now, but we thought it'd be awesome if you shared your story and how you got involved with this particular ministry that you have found yourself being a huge part of. So tell us a little bit about what Asifiwe is.
Asifiwe is a child care ministry in Uganda, in Africa. Uganda is called the Pearl of Africa. It is, as Brett knows now, he's been there with me. Beautiful place. I went there to get involved with my cousin who lives there, who moved there as a missionary. And when I landed to help these people, I landed in one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. Palm trees and perfect weather. Really awesome place to be, but struggling family-wise. There's kids everywhere. 52% of the country is 15 years or younger. So that's one of the prime reasons my cousin stayed there. Just the need is so great. So she is opening up homes for children who don't have a family or have a broken family in some way, and she's helping support them so that they can survive, for one, and hopefully thrive, which many of them are now doing years down the road. But in short, she's helping change lives by loving them and giving them the family that they need.
What does Asifiwe mean?
Asifiwe means praise. It's a Swahili word for praise. And my cousin always says she chose that because she wants all the praise to go back to God for everything she's doing. And she realizes it's not her work. She's being used. She loves it. She's given talents and abilities, and she believes it's all from God, and she wants all the credit, all the honor and glory to go back to him.
How many years ago has it been since she started Asifiwe?
Just a couple weeks ago, we passed 8 years of Asifiwe's birthday when they started.
Wow. So as we go through this episode, we'll hear a lot of information about what's going on over there. But could you just talk to us, talk to people that are listening, how did you get involved with Asifiwe?
All right.
This might be a little while. That's good though. It's a good
I'm
story.
just thinking through the amount of ways I can tell that story. It's so many different ways. So my involvement, I married an amazing person who has a massive heart. She wants to help everybody, sometimes to a fault. And I don't try to say that in a negative way. I say that because it's like sometimes I don't have the energy to keep up with her. She just keeps going and going and going. And she wanted to help our kids in an awesome way, to get them connected with kids who are not as fortunate as ours. We don't need anything. We live in America. We have everything we need is so convenient to get to buy to entertain ourselves. I mean, that a lot of us, our problems are finding entertainment, right? Well, there's kids in the world, their problems are finding somewhere safe to sleep or food for the day, or maybe they're in a good position where they're thinking a day ahead. But either way, horrible places that they're in. And my wife wanted to help my kids realize that there's such drastic differences around the world, and she's gotten a sense of that growing up in a church, knowing missionaries. She had great parents who introduced her to many people from around the world and who traveled the world. So what we did was get our kids writing letters through organizations like World Vision and Compassion. They're great ministries similar to what Asifiwe is, that help children focus on children's needs around the world. So our kids, our boys, we had 3 boys, have 3 boys, and now we have 2 daughters as well. But when my boys were young, about 5 years old, for their 5th birthday, they basically picked a sponsor kid, and they began a relationship. And I had no idea what that was going to mean eventually, but that was just the beginning of something awesome. Just a shift in thinking only about ourselves and what we need, but thinking about others at the same time. And so we started sponsoring kids, and for me personally, that started changing me. And my wife wanted to have a daughter. We only had 3 boys, so we got into foster care. There's a lot of background to that, but I don't want to bore you with all the details. But I thought I was helping kids because I had lived this life of just a privileged American, great parents, great career start, and I thought, you know what, I have the resources to help a lot of kids. I'll bring them into my home and teach them some things and help them. And what I didn't know was God was using those kids to change me. And I'm sure I helped them in some way, but I know that it far outweighed. It helped me become more patient. It helped me become just to live, like I said, outside of myself and not thinking of only myself, but thinking these kids, need help. They need guidance. They need stability. So God really started working in my life a lot, changing me, who I was. And another thing my wife did was get me involved because she knew as we had moved away from where I grew up in big family and lots of people around all the time. We moved 45 minutes away, and I didn't have a lot of friends and family close by anymore, which is what I was so used to. So she thought it'd be awesome for me to continue playing basketball like I grew up doing, but with a group in the community that just played. It was like a 40 and older league. And then where I was only about 30, they let me play with them. And I ended up meeting a guy who took me to his church. He invited me to go to a men's breakfast. And at that men's breakfast, there was a guy who challenged everyone there to come back and be discipled. Just come in on Saturdays, and I'll share my life with you guys. I'll share my things that I am studying and growing. And I was drawn to that because it was like almost a continuation of what I grew up with, going to church and having a great mother and father teaching me. It was great to continue to have that every week, and it was like almost like a great start for having that. And then church on Sunday was like it set the tone for my week ahead of me. So I really kind of became grounded in that and realizing that there was a lot of change that needed to happen in me through all the advice. I realized how little I knew through that. And a year later, the same breakfast happened, and there was a guy there who challenged everyone. He said, "What would you do if God wouldn't let you fail?" And that hit me like a punch in the face, like a physical hit. Like I felt, oh man, that's how I should be living. Because I've been going to church my whole life. I have parents who tell me God is real, but I don't really live that way. I kind of live this safe. I have my career. I'm doing the things that I think I need to do to do the best for my family. But I wasn't really trusting God and making Him a big part. It was kind of like as a lot of guys do, we compartmentalize, right? God was in His compartment. I didn't really think of Him as like He's behind everything that I'm doing and moving with that confidence with Him behind me. So. What happened with that question was like a bunch of thoughts started flooding in my head. And growing up in a big family, meeting my wife who has always worked with children in one way or another, it was pretty clear that children was we taught in Sunday school. Another thing that we did, it was like, okay, God has gifted me with not only patience through foster care and all these things that I've kind of grew in, but just the ability to really connect with kids and help them and love them and truly love them. Like there's some people that hold babies, they kind of, hey, take it back type thing. I actually truly love holding babies, and I love being with kids, and I love throwing a ball. All those things that just spending time with a kid. God put that in me to love that and enjoy it. So there's thoughts all start rushing through my head. And then I mentioned getting hit in the face. Like it felt like that. I really, truly felt as if someone nudged me in the arm and said, write this down. And I wrote down the word, start an orphanage. I can see it in my head right now, like it was yesterday. And this is years ago now. This is about 6 years ago, more like 8 years ago. I wrote down start an orphanage, but I'm a computer programmer. I'm like that. Once on the way home, even I'm thinking it's not going to happen. It's not the way things work. It's not how it goes. It's not actually going to happen. And little did I know, that was just him, getting things ready, getting me prepped for it. Because within a couple of weeks, I heard that my cousin was in Uganda starting an orphanage. It's all it was in my head, an orphanage. And I reached out to her and said, hey, I don't know if you remember me. We're cousins. We're separated by quite a few years. But I said, hey, I was told you're starting this, and I think I want to be involved. I would love to sponsor a kid that I can actually see a picture of with you. I mean, not with some stranger, not with not writing letters and not knowing when they're going to write back. But like I could email my cousin or call my cousin and say, hey, we're writing a letter. Can we get a letter back? Things like that. I just thought it'd be nice to have a real close connection. So that was the beginning of my connection with her.
So you mentioned the word orphanage, and just obviously we know a lot about your story, and obviously I've been there now twice to Uganda with you. But before you move on to your next level of involvement, can you tell us a little bit about the orphanage structure? Because we don't ever hear that word used when we're talking about childcare ministries. We don't ever use the word orphanage. Right. It's not how we describe it, but can you talk a little bit about the style, the way that they've been able to really foster to these kids?
Yeah, and I wanted to use that word intentionally because that's how I always thought about it, like a big home full of kids running around and someone kind of maybe checking in, making sure the food's ready, stuff like that.
I think about Annie, right? Whenever I think orphanage, I think about
exactly,
Annie.
Yeah, there's a little bit of chaos.
Yeah.
So Asifiwe is modeled after another ministry called Watoto. And there's Julianne, who's my cousin, and then there's a man named Danica. And they work together, and they both had the same heart of helping children. So my cousin was helping one girl, Danica was helping another girl. And the short story is they realized they both have the same heart, and they want to help kids. And they came together and modeled their ministry after Watoto, which is what Danica grew up in. His family was not a mother, father, brother, sisters kind of family. It was, father died, mother died, grandparents are in the picture, aunts and uncles are somewhat in the pictures. I don't know all the details of his story. I'm piecing it together over the years. But the support came from a ministry called Watoto, and he lived with them, and his brother was with him there. And although it's not a perfect system, it is a family, like a church, like a friend group. You have close support. And what Asifiwe did was model after that and use the experience that Danica had to create the system where it's not a big orphan home. There's no chaos. It's very orderly, and it's as close to an American family, mother, father, brother, sister, and in a single home as they can get. So they employ a mother. That's the first step, right? And simultaneously find a home for that mother to live in, and then connect kids with the mother. If it's a good fit, if they get along, if they obviously didn't want to have a bunch of teenage boys and teenage girls together, so they have to do some work to figure out which home kids go to. But the model is a mother in a home and 8 to 10 kids, and once they fill that home with kids from all ages, which is great for the kids too, because the older kids get a sense of responsibility taking care of the younger ones. So it's not just a ministry like we're just here to serve you. The kids jump in and help with laundry, to make sure they clean up their rooms. They take care of younger ones. They all have shifts for dishes, for food, all that stuff. So it's a ministry where everyone is growing together. Even the mother, going from, sometimes they have no kids, sometimes they have 1 or 2 kids that they bring into the ministry with them, but suddenly they have a large family. And not only that, they have the other Asifiwe homes as part of that community as well. And they go to church together, they do life together as an Asifiwe, as a big group, as a community group, but then they also have their family. They call their family 1, family 2, family 3.
So in that family entity, ultimately, that Asifiwe has tried to create, there is one house that tends to have a few more children than others, right? It's the baby house over there with lots of moms. And Can you tell us a little bit about how kids continue to come to Asifiwe and what that baby house looks like?
Sure. Yeah. So there was a case with a kid who was. I mean, some of the stories are horrific. One kid was just dumped in a latrine and left there to die. And there's another kid I can think of off the top of my head who was just left in a garbage pile, just left to die because they believe they can't take care of the kid, or they believe the kid's cursed in some way, just all different reasons. Recently, a kid was left in a field when you were there with me. I mean, we hear a story of just a mother leaving a kid in the field, and they just, again, they haven't had parents, they haven't had a good upbringing, they don't believe they can support these kids, so they need someone to either take care of them, or they hope to just kind of get rid of the problem because now they have a lot more responsibility. So what happened is as Asifiwe grew, it became closer and closer associated with the authorities, and the authorities would then call when there's an issue, when there's not anyone else to get involved. They know Asifiwe can help, even if it's just temporary, take care of a kid, because they have the model set up with the moms and the social workers in place and the caseworkers in place to help facilitate what needs to happen with those kids. So there was a shift where once they got that first baby and then another baby and another baby, they realized they can prevent all the problems that happen with a young person who doesn't have guidance, who's just surviving day to day, skipping school, all those different things, the trouble that you get into. We all know, we've all been kids. You get into trouble when you don't have something to do and you don't have structure. So there was a kind of, not a complete shift and a change in the ministry, but an opening for another opportunity, not only to keep those homes going, but at the same time open a baby home where they can have babies that have been left in a field, have been dumped anywhere, or just the parents are temporarily unable to take care of these kids. They can take care of them in this baby home. And it's supposed to be 3 and under. Sometimes it goes a little past that before they actually find the right placement in one of the Asifiwe homes. But there are 30-something kids there. It is a busy household, and it's a little different setup there where there's not just a house mom. There's a staff that rotates 8-hour shifts or whatever it is, depending on who's available at the time. And my cousin helps there. She's there quite a bit, and she actually, another awesome opportunity for the teenage girls and even some of the guys to go over and help serve the meals. For that many kids, you got bowl, water cup. Someone's got to wash them all. Someone's got to prep it all, and it's a lot of work, but it's again a great opportunity for them to serve each other and to help those kids stay out of the trouble that they could potentially get into if they're left with an aunt or an uncle who has to go to work or leave. They could be raised. A lot of kids there are raised by other kids, which is what it comes down to. And the Asifiwe baby home is playing a big part in preventing that.
Right. So, do you want me to hop? All right. So, obviously, we call this podcast Mountain Movers, right? And we set it up so that this is a lot of times we're talking to the industry leaders, people who have done things differently, who have overcome obstacles. You've moved mountains in other ways. You've moved them for kids. You've moved them in your life, right? Like your life has been moving mountains. And so let's go back if we can. You wrote down, start an orphanage with no real understanding why that even was pen to paper, right? Can you tell us what happened after that? What was the next step?
Sure. Yeah,
in moving your mountains.
Let me start by saying it's not me who moved any mountains. And I think if I could get into all the details, if there was, obviously I'm not going to do it today, get into all the details, but if I do, the more detail I get into, the more it's evident that it's not me. It is just like Asifiwe, the praise goes back to God, and he's been behind it all. And it's much easier for me to see it in hindsight. So like when I wrote down Start an Orphanage, I had no idea what that was in looking at it then, but looking back, it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So God has been orchestrating so many things in my life. Again, starting with a big family. I was raised in a big family, and I was number 2. So I was changing diapers, I think, when I was 8. I remember maybe even before, but all these types of things of getting into helping kids. I look back now, and it's like that I was on a path to help as many kids as I can. Foster care. I mean, we're not normal foster parents either. We had 35 4 kids in our house in 3.5 years. Typical foster family has 1, 2, I mean, if it's a lot, maybe 5 or 6, 10 if it's an extreme case, but we had 34. So God has been just using kids to change me, to change my wife, to give us preparation for more. And we both loved the ministry of Asifiwe and loved the idea of being in a close relationship with kids that we're supporting. One of the funny thing my wife used to say is, I'm tired of writing letters to little kids who just say, how's the weather? Or what's your favorite color? And where it's fun and good, after a while, you want to get a little deeper, right? So having a relationship with my cousin and being able to, like I said, email or call if we wanted to even have a conversation with our kid, it was possible, at least possible. We didn't know what that meant, but it was at least possible. So, as I mentioned earlier, God started moving and changing in my life. And one of the things that changes, I started reading the Bible a lot. Because if you're going to know what he wants, I mean, he gave us directions, and there's some of it's there. He's not always going to audibly speak to you or make you feel like you're bumped on the elbow to write down the word, start an orphanage. Sometimes it's going to be through his word that is his story, right? It's history. It's written down. A lot of people's stories we can learn from. So I'm hoping that's what I'm here for, that someone can relate to my story, just like I've related to stories from the Bible, stories from friends. I started reading a book called Crazy Love by Francis Chan, and I'm on vacation just reading this book, and I got this sense of like, I'm so focused on my career and things being a certain way. I felt overwhelmed. Like, why do we have things? I'm going to die someday. What do I place my value in? Like, it's funny. I went and bought this ring, and everyone does it, right? We buy wedding rings when we want to get married, we want to impress a girl, and we want to sweep them off their feet, and we want to get a nice diamond ring. And I did that. I followed that path that everyone does. But I'm thinking, like, wait, why did I do that? Just because everyone else does. Like, I don't care about a little shiny stone. That shiny stone could feed some kids that we're saying we want to help. But then there's like thousands of dollars that we spend on these things. And that thought was just like overwhelming. And I sat there thinking about it and praying about it. And next thing, my wife opens a sliding door of the beach house. And I'm like, hey, what do you think about selling your wedding ring so we could use it for something better? And I always laugh because I'm like, she didn't kill me. That was like, she could have killed me. She could have like come at me and we could be done by now, but she didn't. She just calmly like just soaked it in. Like, where did that come from? But she didn't like, it was very calm is probably the best word I can think of. Just, I don't know. And some time went by and I think I brought it up again. And we had bought the ring from her uncle, and she's like, you can ask my uncle, see what it says. And it was just like that kind of like cautious, we're not going to jump into this and do anything crazy. Just sell it, get a couple $100 for it, whatever. It was like, hey, let's see what happens. And so I approach him and I asked him, hey, what do you think? And it was just a family gathering. I didn't even go out of my way to talk to him. I just waited until we met up the next time. And he's like, oh, I don't know. It might be tough. I have another one just like it. And it's been sitting in there for 11 months in my shop. So I'm like, okay, well, hey, we're just trying to do where we feel like we're trying to do what we feel like God's leading us to do. So this is our next step in at least seeing what happens. And we know we're not in control of this. So let's see if God's in control, what he's going to do with it. So he takes the ring and he calls me back 4 days later and he got the full price back for it. And that other person who had that ring sitting here for 11 months, I don't know what happened with them, but our ring, we got that money back. And what's funny about it was I didn't know what to do with it because as all this is happening, my sister and brother-in-law are also considering being missionaries, and they're traveling the world trying to figure out where they're going to be missionaries. And so we get this money, and I'm like, oh crap, do I give it to my cousin or my sister? So I'm torn with and I'm the financial guy in the family. My wife doesn't deal with it. So since it was her ring, I put this on her. I said, this is up to you. You tell me what to do with it, and I'll move it where it needs to move. And again, she didn't rush it, which is awesome. I've learned so much from her, and I realize that more and more as I'm saying. I'm just a little pawn on the chessboard here. God's using me and my wife and using her in a much bigger way than me. But I get to tell the story, so I'm super thankful for that. But she decided, I'll just pray about it and I'll wait. And we're sitting in church one day. She's like, it's going to your cousin. I don't know why, but it's going to your cousin. I'm like, okay, that's great. It'll help our kids. We'll support more kids through my cousin's ministry. So we got our kids. I emailed my cousin, got our kids supporting more kids through them. So at this time we had several sponsor kids. And so it was like a small step into being more involved, and sent that money from the wedding ring over to my cousin. Had no idea how she was going to use it or what she was going to do. We really didn't know much about the ministry at that point, how far along it was and her history. But people started asking questions because we started getting more involved. And Julianne's mom was also one of the stateside people who were involved. So people would ask her questions. She goes to a different church than me. So people from our church and people in my circle would ask me questions and my wife questions. And we just realized we needed to know more. So at some point, I realized I should go. I should go to visit this ministry. And I had a friend who was organizing a trip. So I figured, okay, that's great. I don't have to really, I've never traveled the world. I'll just go along and see what's going on. And it was a church group, Calvary Chapel. That's where my cousin was sent from, and that there's a Calvary Chapel in Entebbe, Uganda, where she is. So it was great to be with a different group of people, watch what God was doing through a different ministry, and just kind of be there. Crazy part was the trip got canceled. So I was bummed, and I'm like, it was one of those things where you think God's got everything going for you in a certain way. Again, like looking back, I didn't really know what he was doing until hindsight. Trip got canceled, but an opportunity came up within 3 weeks to go on another trip. And it was a different ministry that was not Calvary and was not going to be heavily involved with what Julianne was doing, which was, in hindsight, again, looking back, it was awesome because I wasn't just one of the people in the group and it wasn't busy. That group went and did their ministry, and I got to be with Julianne by myself, watching her and just observing and seeing how she interacted with the people there, I got to hear a lot because it was just me. I got to hear a lot about how it started and what their goals were and just everything about the ministry. And I watched them pray over everything. And that really impressed me. That changed me. Like, because a lot of people say they believe in God. They go to church and they want to do the right things, but do they really, like a kid going to their dad? How much does a kid really go back to their mom or dad? And wouldn't it be better if they did more often? And I just came home with that mindset of like, wow, they pray a lot because they want to do it right. They want to ask his blessing. They don't want to waste any of the resources that they have. And they had, at that point, started getting quite a bit of attention on the state side with Julianne's mom and with me and my wife and others getting involved with fundraising and supporting kids. So I came back from that trip and I wanted to sponsor everyone. I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the way they pray over everything, the way that the passion that the kids had. And they're kids. They're not perfect. It's not like I came back and was like in fantasy land, but I came back and was like very, very impressed and realized, like I said earlier, we don't need anything. That's what I came back feeling like. We have everything. And these kids stability would be awesome. If we could help more of them have stability, that'd be great. At least they'd have an opportunity to thrive. And again, my wife talked me to a place of, here's what we should probably do. That we're not going to just be unreasonable. Let's be reasonable about this. So we talked about it and came to the decision we could sponsor all the teenagers, and it was about 12 kids at the time, which is a lot of sponsor kids for us. I'm not, financially, I'm just one of those middle class guys, just trying to do what I can, support my family, and again help as many kids as I can. So I said, hey, if we sponsor the teenagers, we don't have to just talk about the weather and favorite colors. So I was like, this is great. We can talk to all these teenagers all the time. And I looked at our budget, and that's what we could do. And what was a little crazy about it was we had over that first trip, all the time preparing for the trip. And while I was there, my wife was researching this school, FCA, that you mentioned. I know you mentioned it in your podcast you teach there. We wanted our kids to go there, but it's a private school, so it's going to be more of an expense than a public school. So how do I budget for sponsoring all these kids, which I knew was right, and how do I send my kids to a school, which I knew was right as well? And again, being the money guy, my wife was like, we're signing our kids up. Are you sure we're going to be okay? And I remember crystal clear, just like the word starred in orphanage. I remember laying in bed and be like, let's go to sleep, hon. It's going to be okay. We know God wants us to do these things. Next morning, my boss called me and gave me a raise, double what I needed to send my kids to school. So those kind of stories happening over and over again in my life have led me to fully be behind this ministry, to know he led me there for a reason. We ended up selling crafts that the kids make and that the Ugandans make, because my cousin would come back and sell them, and that was only a couple times a year. So to kind of get people on board, to get people understanding what she's even doing, she would sell things to support. She would tell stories of the kids. She would get more sponsors. She had sponsor cards. So my wife and I kind of jumped in and took over that part, and that was just another step of us kind of being involved. So my cousin was back out after we decided to sponsor the kids. I went back on a second trip and delivered a bunch of Christmas presents. So at that point, more and more people had been involved that had missed that first trip, and other people from the church that wanted to be involved from Calvary sent a bunch of things, and I got the opportunity to take them and deliver them. So it's a really awesome opportunity to actually introduce one of my sons too. So I took one of my sons, and that was the beginning of getting my family more and more involved. And I came back from that second trip, and my cousin came back, and we joined her. And that's really when we kind of took over the selling things. We were with her at churches, just talking to people, watching her more closely, because we had now really fully into this ministry. And she went back to Uganda. In the meantime, while she was here, she wrote us a note. And we had no idea, because it kind of got lost in a shuffle of all the things of someone who's coming back from Uganda and hitting this church, hitting that church, going to all these churches and trying to get support and raise support and make sure she tells her story, because she knows how powerful it is, and she knows how people here, there's many people here looking for opportunities to help, that want to help. They want to do more than just go to church every Sunday, right? So she's doing that, and we're alongside of her as much as possible. And she goes back home, and I'm preparing for a third trip to take one of my other sons and my father-in-law, who had been involved with the Ugandan ministry. So I'm now bringing more people in with me, and getting closer and closer with my cousin. And as I'm prepping for the third trip, my friend brings over some items to take with me on my trip. And she's like, "Oh, by the way, we found this thank you note from Julianne." It seems like no big deal. But then I read it, and I wish I had it with me because I could read it word for word. But basically, she said, "Hey, thanks for so much. Thanks for letting me use your car. Thanks for helping me sell things. Thank you for helping me spread the word to support these kids. It means more than you know. And I don't know if you actually know this, but that ring you sold and you gave us that money, that helped us actually open the first home. Until that point, they hadn't actually officially started Asifiwe." So one of those things, I had already been on 2 trips. I had already started sponsoring kids. God had me doing things, and it was like to me, the best way I can describe it is like come on, take your step, you're like a father or mother getting the kids scared. They don't want to walk. They've never walked before. Like, come on, do it. Go ahead. You can do it. Trust me. And then, next thing you know, you're running around and they want you to sit down and shut up instead of talk and walk. But, that's what it feels like. Like he's just nudging me along, telling me what to do, kind of guiding me, letting me figure out what that means. And then giving me the opportunity to look back and say, like, wow, he's awesome. He's moving mountains. He's changing so many lives. And one of my favorite things about Asifiwe is their slogan. It's just love changes our stories. Yeah, great shirt. This one may have it. No, it's on the back. By her love, by Danica's love, by so many people sponsoring, and just authentic love for human life and these kids, that to have an opportunity is changing many, many people, including myself.
So how many times have you gone over to Uganda?
So I've been there 12 times. I fell into a rhythm of going twice a year. The first time back was really quick. It was like 4 months after my first trip. And that was pure just excitement. And then I went on my third trip and realized it was 3 times within a 12-month span. And I knew family-wise, work-wise, and just it's a long trip. It's 30 hours of travel door to door. And I'd realized 3 times a year is too much, but 2 times felt great, and it felt like enough to stay in the lives of these kids.
And so those first couple trips were by yourself?
The first trip was by myself with a group of people serving a completely different ministry. Second trip was with my son.
Okay.
Third trip was with my son and father-in-law, and then it just continued, daughters and others, wife. And
so your whole family's been over there?
They've all been there twice now.
Yep.
And one time, their first time all being there together was with a group from church. It was 22 people.
From church, 22 people.
22 people from church, including my family of 7. Yeah. So 15 others. And we built a playground. And that was another kind of miracle story. the government in Uganda had been pressuring Danica and Julianne to build a play. If they were going to be an official ministry, they needed a playground. They needed certain things to be in place, and one of them was a playground. And to that point, they had just rented homes and filled them with kids. They just getting by financially and getting those things all set up was a lot. Not having a playground, not having there's extra things that are awesome to have, but they're taking kids who are surviving and building them into a stable environment. Playground was not really top priority.
A little lower on the
a little lower on the list. That's right. And I got prompted by I would call them two great friends now. They happen to be the pastors of our church. They came to me and said, hey, we'd love to organize a trip. It's clearly you're passionate about this. Would you be willing to organize with us? Let's get a trip. And so we went on a scouting trip. After the idea came to my wife, she had no idea that the Ugandan government was pressuring Asifiwe. But I asked her, I said, hey, what if church got involved? What should we do? She's like, build a playground. Just like that. Like she just knew. And I floated the idea to the guys and they loved it. We went on a scouting trip, planned it all out. And then the big trip happened 6 months later and was super rewarding. I mean, to get our church involved, it wasn't just me. It wasn't just one guy who's passionate about it anymore. They got to hear the stories of 15 more people outside of my family that went. And some of them were, a couple families, husband and wife, and then a husband and wife and their two kids, and then a couple other fathers and sons and daughters. And it was just a great time of working together, of really being a church, really, and connecting with one group of people from one country, completely connecting, diving in, eating meals and just playing and working and just completely connecting and really, truly loving each other. And I would say both of us walked away with awesome stories.
So you went in January of this year?
January and March.
and you went with him in January, correct?
This January, yeah. Maddox and I went.
So you went January and March, but you're going again this year, aren't you? Or
I had plans to, but airline prices went double. So
gotcha.
I don't know if it's happening quite this year. I'm not sure yet.
You're pushing that third trip threshold there.
I'm pushing it.
Yeah, Brett's pushing me to go on a third trip, which I could do because it was two really close together. They almost blended. They were so close together. Mm-hmm. I've never done that before. Previously, it was 4 months was the closest. So, yeah.
What? So some of the people that have gone over with you, I'm sure that was their first time seeing outside of a vacation and being in a resort, right? Being in another country whose day-to-day lives are polar opposites, right? Than our lives here in the U.S. What is, for people that haven't experienced going and seeing people who live in a totally different way, a culture, expectation, wants, things like that. What do people typically say when they come back from a trip like that? Like a lot of times they'll give like a testimony of how they felt, what they're inspired to do. What's something that you typically see?
Let me point to Brett real quick and just ask him because he was there. It was more recent with January being his second trip, but that first time last June, how did you? What was like kind of your big takeaway?
That there aren't. We talk a lot about wants and needs, and you just use the word wants, right? And really, over there it's needs, right? And a want might be going and furthering education. That would be a big want. Typically, we want a car when we turn 16, right? Or we want to buy a house when we get married. Over there, it's more about this is what I need for my family. I need to put food on the table. I'd like to have a shelter for them to live in. So John mentioned earlier that, in America, we don't want for anything. Truly, comparatively speaking, there's nothing that we want. But one takeaway I took from last January was over there, we needed some supplies. We were working on a project, building some desks. And instead of getting in a car, we walk. Over there we walk everywhere. I mean, we may hop on the back of a boda once in a while to enjoy the experience of riding on the back of a taxi motorcycle, but we typically walk everywhere. And when you walk, life just slows down a little bit, and you walk and you talk and you get to know people and you understand their stories. And I mean, really, that's really what's had given me the opportunity to get to know Manzi, was the times that we've been walking and talking and working together. And I think that's a huge difference. We run at 100 miles an hour compared to how they run in our life. Everything is just 60 miles an hour passing in cars. And over there, it's just different. They wave, they walk, they talk. And to me, that kind of gets into your soul a little bit. And the more I talk about it here, the more it's like, when do we go back?
Yeah, and what it really kind of boils down to, I think, is the simplicity. Like, they walk and they talk. Here, when people walk, they're looking at their phones. They're barely even watching where they're going anymore. We're so busy, we fill our seconds with looking at our phones or with entertaining or whatever it may be. But this getting back to like the simple connecting. I'll never forget, my cousin told me, when people, after a storm, everyone will get up and check on their neighbors. Hey, did you make it through the storm okay? How'd you sleep? Everything okay? And it's just that communal checking in on each other, truly caring about each other and letting each other know, even if you don't really care, maybe you just need to let them know that somebody is here, you know? So the biggest thing for me coming back my first time was like, wow, like you said, they need stuff. If someone doesn't help them, they won't go to school, and that affects the rest of their life, right? They need somewhere to sleep. They need somewhere to get food. Otherwise, they'll be begging or stealing. Like, some of these kids were led to steal. Some of these kids were led to sell their bodies, and just horrible stories that I've heard over the years of getting to know this ministry. But yeah, the group came back and just very, very thankful for their time. The one guy cut his cable television. He's like, I don't need that. It's one of those extra nice to have things, but you know, it's just like you said, polar opposite of they're trying to survive, and here we are with all these extra things.
Consuming.
Okay, yeah,
right.
Yeah.
You just mentioned a little bit about how the kids have, their stories. I'm sure you know so many of lives that they've come out of and now are part of Asifiwe. Is there a story or two you wouldn't mind sharing? Something that's
Sure.
touched you and, sharing that story?
Sure. Yeah, it's not the easiest one, but it's one that I know is okay to tell because I've heard her tell it, and she's told it on video before. Shadia is one of the first girls. My cousin helped her before she realized what Asifiwe would someday become. She was helping Shadia. And Shadia was raped for 8 years by her own dad. First word that comes to mind, I've heard Brett mention it, monster, right? You just think how awful that is. This guy's blessed with 5 daughters, and he starts at the top. And she was the oldest, so she got the most abuse, 8 years of it. And Julianne protected her by taking her in. And she's still there. She's an amazing young woman. I call her daughter. I talked to her on the phone. I told her I was having a bad day a couple months ago, and she wanted to call me and pray with me. I mean, that's the kind of woman she's become. She's a young woman, still in school, out of high school, but she's moving on to bigger and better things, thanks to the support of Asifiwe, thanks to the support of those who are jumping in and realizing that they could help change that story. But after 8 years of abuse, she's in Asifiwe, was able to bring 4 of her sisters along with her because of continued abuse and just the opportunity to thrive. Keep using that word because those kids are thriving compared to what they had before. And just an amazing group of girls, awesome to be around. They're playing, they're smiling, they're laughing. Their lives are still simple, but they have what they need to learn, to grow. They go to church regularly with their family, and they're looking to God. They're trusting God to heal. And this, she amazes me. Shadia forgave her dad and told him that she forgave him. And without spending government dollars on imprisoning him or all the different things that you'd think, like, how do you make that situation right? Like, we shoot him, kill him, take him, put him in prison, lock him away forever. Like, how do you fix that? There's so many thoughts that come to mind. Like, that is a messed up situation. The Bible has that story written over and over again, and she followed it, whether she knew it or not. She ended up forgiving him, still speaking to him, still being in her mother's life, because she realized her mother had her hands tied. It wasn't her fault, right? So she stayed in their lives, and even went as far as bringing her sisters along with her, getting involved in helping with that. Eventually, I mean, she struggles. She still struggles with her dad, but she's at a point now where they're back to talking. Asifiwe has provided a place for her, that space for her to heal as much as she can heal for now. And that separation where the abuse obviously is not continuing, and there can be healing on both sides, because obviously something's wrong on his end too. He needs to heal, and that separation and that the forgiveness has given him an opportunity to repent and to make it right. And he has since done that, and they now have a relationship where she's helping him in his business. He's a business owner, and she's helping him, and they're communicating regularly. And it's not a perfect relationship. Obviously, there's some broken pieces there that are really, really messed up. But just an awesome story that I would never know how to fix that. But love, in so many different ways, has changed that story and changed that family.
Yeah, going back to the question I asked about what do people experience when they come back from a trip like that. A lot of it's a perspective change, right? Understanding what we have here, putting into perspective our problems in relation to the young woman you just mentioned. Problems that we may have in our lives, there are problems. They're significant to us, mm-hmm. and some of them might be quite major. But when you hear these terrible stories like that, and you have a personal connection with someone who's gone through that, they're coming home from a trip like that, or just understanding that there are people that have experiences like this. It does mature you. It does give you a broader perspective of your problems. Maybe they're not as grand of problems as we think they might be when you just put it in perspective. And I know it's hard to do, but I know it's always a lesson that I take away from things like that.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, going over the 15 individuals, and then even more, Brett being there and several others have gone outside of that group, just kind of makes you realize she could be there doing the greatest work in the world, but if no one knows about it, mm-hmm. she doesn't have that support. She's extremely limited in what she can do. So it's an opportunity for me on this side. I would love to live there and be with those kids every day. I've grown really, really close to them. I would love to be with them, but that's not the path God has chosen for me right now. He wants me here, pouring this out of my every day, just talking about these kids, talking about this ministry, and raising support, raising awareness of it, because you can be doing the greatest thing, whether it's business, whether it's helping, but if you don't have the right, I'll say advertising, the right, if no one knows about
support, backing.
You got to let people know somehow, right? So, that's where God has put me on this side of it right now, and my wife probably even more so. She's talking about it just as much as I am. And
so you mentioned Shadia as number one, right? She was the first one who came, or Julianne came alongside. Can you real quick just talk about the growth? Where were the numbers and where do they sit today?
Sure. Yeah. Great question. By the time I got there in 2017, there were already 32 kids. There were 3 homes, and I spent a lot of time at the third home. It happened to be the biggest one with the most land, and it's where my sponsor girl was. I had at that point, our family had sponsored this girl named Irene, and she was at house 3. So I spent a lot of time there, and it's easy to remember that's how many houses there were. And then I went back again with my son, and I watched they grow from 32 people to, by the time I took my second son back, it was already 50 people. And this is only 11 months later. Wow. Just went on my 12th trip in March, a few months ago, and there's over 150 kids. And there's 12 homes, and there's a baby home, and there's staff everywhere. And it's just awesome to see that it has changed from 3 moms in homes to now we've got over 150 kids. And I mention the staff because it's not just the kids' lives that are changing. Obviously, my cousin has changed. God's used this ministry to change her and to become just and giving herself tirelessly every day, all the time. And then the staff, like they're hiring people who are living in this story as well, right? And they're being changed by it. So yeah, it's the house moms, it's the kids, it's the staff, it's an awesome, growing, changing opportunity to serve and to love each other like we're created to do.
As we wrap it up, could you just mention, if there's people that are listening that are touched and inspired, how can people get in touch with Asifiwe, and how could they potentially donate or sponsor a child?
Sure, yeah, I'd love to. There's the website. It's a bit outdated. I've tried to upgrade it, but they have someone working on it. But it has the information that's required there, and it has some of the initial stories there. It's got enough. Again, it's one of those things that we don't pour a lot into because the needs are babies left in the fields and things like that. But the website has the information. It's asifiwechildcare.org, and it's not the easiest thing to spell, but it's on our shirts, and yep. I'm sure you'll
put it right there on the bottom.
You'll put it on the bottom, but asifiwechildcare.org has the donation information and some of the stories, and Julianne and Danica's story as well.
Because at the end of the day, you've moved mountains with what you've done, and your story alongside Jacqueline and everything that you guys have put into it. You truly have moved mountains, and there is no big billionaire trust fund sitting behind this organization, right? So it is just regular, like you mentioned, middle-class people that just believe that they can leave the world a little bit better than they found it. And we thank you for taking the time to come and tell us your story, and ultimately, hopefully, like John said, hopefully we've touched a life or two here in this episode, and maybe somebody wants to get involved. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.